morning, everybody. Welcome back to Traveling with the Doobies. And this morning we're in Granada, Spain at the Alhambra. Join us as we look around the palaces and the gardens.
Today is one of our most anticipated days of this entire voyage, and in the cold and early morning light, the Seabourn Encore enters the industrial port of Motril. If Cartagena was a perfect example of a great Mediterranean cruise port, Motril is just the opposite, as this working dock not only moves fuel and goods, but there's also a Spanish Army staging base for troops to deploy from the Spanish mainland to Spanish North Africa. And charming coastal town, well, there's a shuttle for that into the town center of Motril. Still not all that charming. But luckily, we have our sites and reservations set for transportation to the city of Granada, about 90 minutes inland and upland from this coastal town. We board one of 4 buses for our Granada on Your Own tour, where we will be dropped just outside of the center of the city and have about 4 to 5 hours to explore. Now, several months back, we had also booked entrance into the Alhambra. More on that process a little later. As we make our way to the north, our guide tells us about the unique climate of the southwestern corner of Spain. The area from the coast to the mountains is known as the Andalusian Tropical Coast. We pass through orchards of custard apples, avocados, mangoes, and even find sugarcane growing here. This microclimate quickly gives way to mountain passes, and due to construction on a major motorway, our driver navigates along a 2-lane highway next to the Guadalfeo River. We've got a little extra time on this long drive, so it's a good time to reflect a bit on the Islamic period of the Iberian Peninsula. About every stop we have made has a history commonly referred to as a Moorish period or occupation. This overly simplistic categorization is used to describe over 700 years of Islamic rulers on the peninsula and romanticizes some periods and vilifies others. So as we head up to the last of the Islamic Kingdom strongholds, maybe we can shed a little light on this significant period of Western history. In 711, forces led by Tariq ibn Ziyad established Al-Andalus with the defeat of the Visigoths at the Battle of Guadalete. Originally aligned to the Caliphate of Damascus, by 756 Abdullah ar-Rahman declared himself Emir of Cordoba, thus creating an independent kingdom, ultimately becoming a caliphate in 929. Cordoba became one of, if not the most culturally advanced and wealthiest cities on earth, and in comparison to the majority of Dark Ages Europe would have been a beacon in the West with paved streets, 700 public baths, and 800 mosques serving a population of more than 300,000. From our drop-off point on Paseo de la Bomba, we begin the 40-minute walk up, and I mean really up, to the Alhambra. We had planned to catch a local bus, but either the cruise line or the city of Granada changed our drop-off point. So as our legs start to burn a bit, let's consider what life was like during the Islamic Kingdom period. There was a level of tolerance for other faiths, and in many of the early kingdoms, Jews and Christians served in the courts of the rulers. The word tolerated is used in many historical accounts, which when adjusted for the period mostly means you likely wouldn't be killed based on your faith. You would be taxed at a higher rate, but also remember this was a period that lasted over 700 years with many different leaders and differing interpretations of religious law. So let's just say tolerance could be fickle. For the majority of common folks though, they farmed, they worked a trade, they prayed at the most in-favor house of worship, and when not at war, enjoyed the Mediterranean climate and mostly bountiful food. Make no bones about it, this was a period of continuous conflict. There was expansion by the Islamic rulers and pushback from Christians from the north and east, as well as conflict based on ideology, those that had become soft versus hardline groups. In the 1050s, the Almoravid dynasty, composed of Muslim Berbers, absorbed most of the small kingdoms and pushed northward into what is now the Basque region of Spain, and they were ultimately defeated by the Almohads, who claimed to be more strict believers, and their empire moved the capital from Cordoba to Seville and ruled until 1269 during the Reconquista. Technically, the Reconquista is classified by some historians as the world's longest war, as Christian armies tussled with Islamic rulers really from the late 8th century until the fall of Granada in 1492. In reality, the significant push from a united and organized coalition of armies from Castile, Aragon, and Leon, amongst others, into the Iberian Peninsula occurred with the Second Crusades, and key victories in 1212 began a march to the south that in the end left only Granada as the last remaining Islamic kingdom in Iberia. Our approach to the Alhambra takes us through a park to a final climb to the Puerta de la Justicia. We make a hairpin turn inside and are quickly at the visitor center with lockers, restrooms, and vending machines. Tickets to the Alhambra need to be purchased well in advance and cost just over €19, including service charge, and that allows access to the Alcazaba and Tenerife Palace and gardens, and you can access these spaces at any time during the day of your ticket. To visit the Nasrid Palaces, though, you need to select a specific time, and they are strict about guests adhering to the reserved time slot. An important note, when you book your ticket, you will need to provide your passport number, and you must bring and present your passport associated with your ticket at the entrances in order to gain access. This process is to prevent local tour companies and ticket scalpers from reserving and reselling these limited entry tickets. I did see some tourists who were directed to a separate line in a window with ID issues. I'm not sure if they were ever allowed in. I'm not a big fan of taking my passport off the ship, so the Doobie crew had to double and triple check that we had our IDs before we left the boat. Our Nasrid Palace tickets are for entry at 11, so we still have a little time to explore. Our first stop is in the palace that never really was, at least for the kings that sponsored construction. The Palace of Carlos V was commissioned in 1526 to serve as a royal residence when the monarch traveled to Granada. This palace is a Romanesque Renaissance style and was slowly developed with internal columns and facades, but ultimately was abandoned in 1637 and remained unfinished until 1923. It now houses the Museum of the Alhambra and various exhibits in the corridors leading from this grand open plaza. How does it fit in with the Nasrid architecture? Yeah, it doesn't. Above the gardens is the Church of St. Mary, and it sits on what once was the Royal Mosque. Construction of the church began in 1581 and finished in 1618. We find that even the snack shop up the plaza has some character. All right, it's just about 11, so let's head to the palaces. Through the first porticos of the palaces, we come to the Court of Myrtles, highlighted by a long reflecting pond, and we are struck with the symmetry of the space and yet the contrast of colors of the white marble and the greenery and the reflective properties of the water. What you'll see throughout the architecture of the Alhambra is at first a quiet simplicity, a space that feels peaceful without gaudiness or overt elaboration. But then you get closer, and the intricacies of the details start to soak into you. The stone-carved calligraphy inscriptions, which strive to honor God first, and yet blends into the structure. God truly is in the details in this place, with over 10,000 inscriptions within the palaces. The inscriptions are from the Quran and from Islamic poets. The ceilings are really fascinating and unique. We find carved wooden geometric ceilings with 8 and 16-point stars, and the most striking are the ivory tile ceilings, symbolizing the 7 levels of heaven in Islam and the 4 trees of life. One of the most amazing things about the Alhambra is that the Catholic Spanish royalty kept the architecture mostly as it was before the Reconquest. There are a few rooms where the reliefs on ceilings were replaced with the initials for Ferdinand and Isabella, and a few 15th century paintings replaced the Islamic symbolism, but mostly the original Islamic architecture was kept in place. Now, the palace was utilized as a royal residence and court, but it was also seen as an opulent and beautiful backdrop to royal proceedings, regardless of the religious significance. So, a couple of key rules that will get you lectured by staff at the Alhambra. Backpacks must be worn in front of your body. This could be to prevent pickpockets, but primarily it's to prevent the inadvertent rubbing against the doorways and walls. The second rule, no use of tripods, and this includes camera extenders and selfie sticks. Yeah, Doobie got lectured for extending the DJI for a better shot of the ceilings. Lo siento. One of the most striking areas is the Patio of the Lions, with a central fountain resting on the backs of lions and surrounded by a forest of small columns that provide striking visual perspectives. The shine of the marble this morning with the rain on it also added a glassy effect. Just about every room in the Nasrid Palaces evoked their own wow moments. We also see colored tiles throughout the palaces. And not only do they add a little bit of additional pizzazz to the space, but they also provide a cooling effect in the warm summer days in Granada. As we exit the palace baths, we enter the gardens that would have been enjoyed by 22 generations of Nasrid rulers. We can see the Albaicin neighborhood below, the Abbadia del Sacromonte monastery above, and we get a glimpse of the Generalife summer palace and gardens. While most of the Islamic kingdoms were pushed out of the Iberian Peninsula in the 13th century, the Nasrids were able to maintain a presence in Granada by strategically aligning with Fernando III to take Cordoba for Castile. After a period of brief truce and unsuccessful rebellion, the Nasrids struck a deal with Fernando, and the Taifa of Granada remained intact as a vassal state to Castile for the next 2.5 centuries. It was during this period that the Alhambra fortress and palaces were built. Enter here two of the more famous European monarchs and a power couple that reshaped the Western Hemisphere, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. With the united and expansion-focused Spanish Empire coming together, they were focused on driving the Muslims from Spain and began a 10-year siege of Granada that culminated in the surrender of the city by Sultan Boabdil to the Spanish on January 2nd, 1492. Our final stop on the Alhambra Hill is a walk through the Alcazaba. This fortress with impressive towers looming over Granada was the first structure built by the Nasrids at the Alhambra, although there were likely already some older defensive structures on site. The fortress also served as the royal residence until the palaces were built in the 14th century. Time has a way of slipping by quickly in an amazing site like the Alhambra, and from the watchtowers we can see some significant storms forming to our west. So reluctantly, we make our retreat from the Alhambra and take a footpath through the park down toward the center of town. Surprisingly, we find a monument to an American author as we explore, Washington Irving. In 1829, Irving, making his second visit to Spain, stayed within the Alhambra and fell in love with the site, which had fallen into neglect. His 1832 book, Tales from the Alhambra, is credited for inspiring historic interest in the site and sparking preservation efforts. Along with the obligatory tourist shops, you can still find craftspeople creating tiles, inlaid wood works, and even custom-made Spanish guitars in this amazing city. About 25 minutes from the Alhambra is the Cathedral complex of Granada, and the final resting place of Spanish royalty, including those monarchs of 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella, who had declared they should be entombed in Granada. The chapel was completed in 1517, and the couple's remains were moved to the city. No photography is allowed inside the chapel, so I guess you're going to have to visit the site on your own. We have about 45 minutes before we have to meet our bus, so just enough time to explore some back alleys and squares in the center of the city. Time also to grab a little cheesecake for a snack, and of course, hey, it's a long bus ride back to the port. Just in time, the rain is getting heavier. The La Bamba fountain is now in sight, as are the Christmas carnival rides we'd seen on the way into town. And I admit, it's going to be nice to get out of the wet and rest these wearied dogs on our warm and comfortable coach.
So here's a cool thing. You're told be at the bus stop to get back to the ship by no later than 2:15. It's 2:05. No bus to meet you or pick you up. So you all just stand in the rain.
Yeah, such are the tragedies in the life of a traveler. Seems the assigned drop-off is also used for every bus that comes into Granada at any time, not just our seaborne buses. Tonight we're going to have a little indoor Broadway, moved from the rainy pool deck with our Seabourn 6 performers. And that's a wonderful prelude to tonight's dinner, which includes duck à l'orange, ribeye steak, couscous salad with shrimp. Oh, just wonderful, followed by those desserts. We have another big day tomorrow as we touch a new continent. We're going to see you in Ceuta. Good night.